But with that, let's dive into some ecosystem updates. Right off the hop, this was really cool to see. Grelf interviewing Charles, the president of Hedera. I know this is probably not the interview that many were expecting as kind of a first community media foray for Charles into the ecosystem. And I know that the content of the interview was, it was maybe not what a lot of people expected. Still important. What kind of birthmark would you have? What are your thoughts on the thesis of getting a giraffe for the ecosystem? Talking a lot about bugs and fish. So we learned a lot about Charles as a person. So I'd say go check out that interview if you're in for a chuckle. If you're looking for anything serious, you got to know Gerbert the Grelf is a silly guy. To be honest, I was kind of surprised that Charles could keep a straight face. It's pretty impressive, but shout out to Grelf. And you got to read it in between the lines there, right? Meme coin on Hedera, interviewing Hedera's president, whatever you may think about it. There's obviously something happening here. It's clear that Charles hasn't been in a position since he really came into his position. He hasn't been in a place where he could kind of bridge those gaps in this way. So I potentially see this as a sign of things to come. I'd love to have Charles on this show. Charles, if you're watching or listening or whatever, please shoot me a DM. I'd love to chat. But other than that, I mean, I view this as kind of a positive thing. I hope that we see more stuff like this with Charles. And I imagine too, this interview, because they didn't touch on anything too hot or too focused on topics of the day, I think it was a bit more comfortable for Charles. Strategic move all around, even though talking about silly stuff. I think that in the big picture, looking at this, big positive, to be honest. And shout out, cheers to Gerbert for pulling it off. The other thing too, really quick, that was funny is Charles was wearing a Disney hat. He worked at Disney, but people, of course, on Reddit and stuff were like, is Disney coming to the governing council? So, it was great to see. Also too, shout out to the HBAR Foundry group of founders and developers meeting regularly in Hedera. They published a community calendar. We've got Hashgraph Enthusiasts on there, which is great. But yeah, on the hbarfoundry.com website, you got a community calendar here. A lot of people have been asking for this. Where's a calendar I can go to for like regular spaces or events or whatever? So you can get your event on the agenda. You fill out a form. I'd encourage folks to do that. We've needed this for a long time. It just took somebody just setting it up. So huge shout out to HBAR Foundry. Love to see it. Also, too, this was an interesting observation. We're going to be switching gears quite a bit in these ecosystem updates. Hashpoint Research, as I had on the show last week. Yeah, there was a great conversation last week with Brian from Hashpoint. Go back and make sure to check that out. It was a really great conversation. Good morning, Michael, tuning in. It says, hi, everyone. Hashpoint is a really interesting tool because not only can you see the TPS, but you can also see the funding amount that Atma.io has in their account. And so it's really interesting on their platform to be able to see how much money Atma has in their account that's used to pay for transactions for their use case, which, as we know, is 99% of transactions on Hedera, and time that. So based off of the volume and the amount of money they have in their wallet, how many days left do we have for Atma transactions? And as we can see, if I go to the Hashpoint Research dashboard, we're currently at 22 transactions per second. So it does line up. And the question is now, how does that work, right? How does the funding component work for Atma.io? But it's an interesting observation. Every time that account kind of runs dry, transactions kind of pop off. So interesting observation. And I imagine we'll see the TPS come back up again. Michael Garber at Hashgraph, aka Swirls Labs, sending out a fire tweet posts, when the new stuff that's being worked on at Hashgraph, meaning, Swirlds Labs, aka Swirlds Labs, is introduced to the market, the world will not be the same. Once it is realized, everyone in doubt will bow with fully bent knees. There is no better ledger. So clearly, Michael at Hashgraph, clearly hinting that something huge is coming from their standpoint. And yeah, we're seeing a lot of this, which is really interesting to see. Also, Only LARPing from Karate Combat, founder of Karate Combat, Only LARPing. I feature his tweets on the show a lot. He says, October 11th, karate's biggest announcement ever, live from Permissionless and Karate Combat 50. So stay tuned. I mean, October 11th, there's going to be something big. So he's posting that. We should probably, my next show will be on the 9th or 10th, most likely. So just days before this announcement. So that's going to be very interesting to see what that is about. Some folks have some ideas. We don't know quite yet. Chainlink. This was also interesting to see. A lot of folks weeks ago, and including Grelf on my show, were talking about Chainlink shipping hedera. The repository pull requests for the Chainlink integration has received an update that it has become a little stale. So I think this is an automated action. I know a lot of people were talking about this. Basically, it implies that there's some kind of slowdown with the integration, or that something's on hold or whatever. In my mind, this is kind of an automated GitHub action. So if a pull request doesn't have a ton of activity for a while, it'll be marked to, inactive. So or stale. So I wouldn't read too much into this. I saw that a developer did rename ship hedera to work in progress ship hedera. So obviously, changes happening there for better or for worse. But keeping an eye on that. As we know, we've heard from a few different sources that, Chainlink, I say a few different sources, I mean Grelf, that Chainlink is coming to hedera. So seems to be the case still, but just keeping an eye on that. Also too, very great observation from Zuik watching the show, saying we also have the upcoming Axelar announcement tomorrow, which will apparently involve hedera. The HBAR Foundation was retweeting. Great observation. We did see the HBAR Foundation retweet this promotional content from Axelar. Axelar saying the Renaissance awaits October 3rd, which is tomorrow. Today's the 2nd. HBAR Foundation retweeting it. We've seen rumors here and there, a lot of people in the comments diving in and kind of, jumping on in anticipation of what this could be. Definitely this is pointing to a possible hedera integration or something like that. There's nothing really concrete out there publicly right now other than this. And this definitely means something if the HBAR Foundation is retweeting it. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And of course, Axelar means, bridges, all these different types of things. So very exciting stuff that's been a big talking point in the ecosystem for quite a while. Another update from a use case that many are familiar with that's gone through a rebrand that I think is pretty exciting. Scintilla is the new name of Toko. So if people were familiar, earlier this year, last year, all that kind of stuff. So DLA Piper is a governing council member, but obviously like leading global law firm, and obviously interested in DLT technology, namely hedera. They're a very involved council member. Scott Thiel was actually at ETH Denver. Scott Thiel had left DLA Piper to start. It starts with an M. Momentous or something like that. It's a spinoff of DLA Piper. And then we had Toko, which Scott Thiel was also at, but Toko was dealing with digital asset issuance, and they also had received one of the first, or maybe the first, sign off and clearance from VARA, which is the regulatory body in Dubai. So it was very well positioned in there, and it was called Toko. And so last week, on Friday, we saw Toko unveil that they had rebranded to Scintilla. And this is a very interesting thing. There was an interview that Tim Popwell did with the HBAR Bull. I encourage people to go check that out. That goes in depth into this. But yeah, this used to be Toko. So I know that Toko is an important brand for a lot of people in this ecosystem. Rebranded Scintilla. It feels to be pretty much the same thing. In partnership with DLA Piper, of course, licensed by VARA in Dubai. Similar kind of offerings, right? Advisory, broker, dealer, exchange, different use cases. So this is something that I think is very interesting because there is fresh leadership. This is definitely a use case that is on Hedera and potentially other networks. And this is a spinoff with close ties to DLA Piper, a governing council member. DLA Piper being, I think, the main shareholder in Scintilla. So cool stuff. We're going to have to follow this. But this is an update from Toko, now Scintilla. And we've been seeing a bit of this, rebrands, moving around, mergers, migrations, people moving around different projects. So it's definitely a season of movement and change for the better. And that kind of lines up with what's going on with Hedera at the core of the ecosystem. Some more kind of very interesting posts. I'd say very crazy posts. I feel like weekly we talk about David, CEO of Fresh Supply Company, FSCO, a use case with ties to MasterCard, a supply chain tokenization use case, a payments use case, lots of exciting things. David tweets, I would suggest buying more HBAR, right, on September 26th. So last week, on Thursday, I believe. Kind of wild. Like David's an interesting guy because he's the CEO of, an enterprise use case on Hedera, but he exhibits the degen behavior that the ecosystem is hungry for. He says again, yesterday, October 1st, I'm literally going to buy the HBAR and alts that people have just sold at Hedera. So again, someone in enterprise shoes acting like a degen, it's hard to hate it. I dig it. I mean, this is kind of the energy we like to see. And then something more substantive, which is interesting, posted today from David was quickly, if you were writing a white paper for a government monetary regulator, what would you say Hedera mainnet benefits are versus traditional EVM options? And lists a few of the differentiators. There's some comments in the post highlighting some of these things. So again, this is somebody who is in the enterprise seat, interfacing with the community, interacting with the community. I like to see it. I like following David on X, so I dig it. Now, I want to talk about a bit of a bigger story. This was one that I think is going to pave the way for some very, very interesting things. So this use case was announced, I believe, Monday. I can't remember. We'll have to check. But basically, this is a new investment body, Canary Trust, that's coming from Steve McClurg, who was the former chief investment officer at Valkyrie Funds. And Valkyrie Funds, as we know, issued a Bitcoin ETF. So this is Canary Trust is a new entity that is an institutional access point for investors to gain exposure to HBAR in a managed way. So if we look at the post from Canary Funds announcing this, growth, risk management, and foresight, introducing Canary Capital, a crypto-focused firm providing sophisticated investment solutions, and our first private trust offering the Canary HBAR Trust, investing in HBAR. So this is, again, if you are a large investor that doesn't want to dip your toes into crypto so much or have a wallet holding HBAR with private keys and all these different types of things, you can do business with Canary Capital. and get exposure to HBAR. We've seen this in a few different places, but this is the latest one. It felt similar on the surface to quite a few other announcements like this, but there's a differentiating factor here that is really interesting that I picked up from some of the press releases. If we look at the CoinMarketCap press release, a story about this, hedera HBAR gains institutional access with launch of Canary Trust. Very cool. And talking about the announcement here, the Canary HBAR Trust is designed as a private offering, allowing qualified investors to securely invest in HBAR. And this is where it got interesting. The launch is reportedly part of Canary Fund's broader objective to pave the way for future exchange-traded funds focused on HBAR. So what this is telling me is there's a pathway that Canary Capital is focused on that gets us to an HBAR ETF, which is very interesting. The CEO of Canary Capital, also again the former chief investment officer at Valkyrie Fund, says, quote, "The accelerating demand for crypto offerings seems to be exponential since this year's launch of spot Bitcoin ETFs. Continuing, yet there remains a gap regarding firms with institutional experience who are willing to continue to innovate and deliver solutions beyond retail products." So basically saying you got to have 1 foot in retail, 1 foot in institutional investing principles and ride that line. And I think that HBAR is kind of in a great position for that. As much as we can kind of criticize Hedera's approach to these kinds of things, that that ultra conservative approach might make it interesting for some of these institutions to tap into. So Canary Capital. Now, of course, I read this and I go, well, is that, this is CoinMarketCap. Like, who wrote this article by BC? Like, who knows? Like, what does this mean? Is this even real? So I looked a little further and I saw another article that actually, the headline is Hedera ETF next in line after first US HBAR trust launch? So similar content here, obviously a very substantial announcement. And then I go over to the HBAR Foundation post by Greg Bell, who I think is probably really behind a lot of the momentum with Canary Capital. And right here, where is this? Here we go. The launch of the trust potentially paves a path for future ETF HBAR-focused investment vehicles as investors seek new ways to access cryptocurrency. So that's a very interesting observation with this. And it gets me thinking. So Canary Capital, U.S. institutional access point. We've really been needing this. We saw announcements last week regarding custodial solutions and also BitGo's USDS stablecoin. So there's all of these very interesting things happening when it comes to altcoins and stablecoins. And then you look at Hedera and how it's positioned, especially with the, stablecoin studio and asset tokenization studio that recently launched. It starts to paint a really compelling picture. And then you add on top of that, the possibility of an HBAR ETF, then it really starts to get interesting. So this is one we're going to watch pretty closely, and we're going to have to see what comes of it. I think Canary Capital is not going to be not going to be the last. I definitely think that we're potentially going to start seeing more institutions kind of like come in with these access points to the Hedera ecosystem, because again, as much as we criticize Hedera's approach, it does make HBAR an attractive asset to investors that are looking to either enable use cases on the network, have exposure to kind of the enterprise side of crypto with the risks that entails. And then it also really highlights, the staking component. And we talked last week with Brian from Hashpoint Research about the yield being real yield. And so, although I agree that there is a need to, get the staking number up, it is interesting to know that the yield on HBAR is a real yield, and it's going to be interesting to see some of these use cases come online. I think of FSCO. I think of, some of the different things we've been talking about over the past few weeks. What impact is that going to have on the network? Are they just going to be HCS use cases, or are we going to start to see more use cases heavily leveraging the token service, all these different types of things? I think about the Hyundai Kia use case that Eric Piccini, CEO of Hashgraph, spoke of. A lot of very, very interesting stuff going down.